A moment. Okay. Okay, so our first three panelists here. First, I'd like to introduce Terry Kennedy to the stage. Next, I will introduce Mr. Rasheen Aldridge. And Miss Megan Marie Betts. And I believe John Collins Muhammad has arrived, so welcome him to the stage as well. Again, the first 40 minutes will be my questions toward the panel, and the last 20 minutes will be Q&A from the audience. So have your questions throughout the discussion ready toward the end. In the wake of Ferguson, new politicians and political candidates have emerged. These new actors in local and state politics have brought new voices and a new generation to bear on the issues brought to light in the fall of 2014. Their voices and their candidacies point to both the possibilities and the limitations of electoral politics in the effort to achieve racial justice and equity in the United States. So the first question I'd like to pose to the panel is, what made you feel the desire to get into the political field in the first place?
I don't need this. Can anybody hear me loud and clear?
Oh, can you speak into the microphone so we have it on record?
I try to stay away from microphones. They got me in trouble in the past. That's a great question. And honestly, when you look at the history of Ferguson and just the history of the African American struggle for civil rights and human rights, you will always find people or persons that are active in a political process. We have Chief Sherman George here. He's no stranger to standing up for African American rights, especially here in the city of St. Louis. But when you look at that history, there are always an elite group of young people or an elite group of just people in general who are actively involved in the political process, either out front or behind the scenes. I think Ferguson just ignited the spirit and the energy to get more involved, because they truly want to change laws for the betterment of the African American community, for the betterment of the community in its entirety. But when you look at the landscape, any people that's more oppressed or any people that is more shut out the process as African Americans. So when you begin to see that and you understand the way things are lining up and the way things are going, then you pretty much have no choice but to run for office, but to work for a politician or work for an elected official, because you understand that the only way to uplift the community is through public policy, is through politics. So I think it was just an understanding that took place, more like an enlightenment that took place that encouraged most of us to run in this past election cycle just 2 days ago. So that's what I think it is.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Thank you for answering that question. I'd like to first have brief introductions of each person, but thank you for that answer to that question. But can we start with Mr. Aldridge and go down about brief introductions of yourself?
How everybody doing today? My name's Rasheen Aldridge, born and raised here in St. Louis. Grew up in the 5th Ward my whole life. Was part of the DSEG program and was a Parkway West alumni. I've been active in the Fight for 15, trying to help increase the minimum wage. Served on the Ferguson Commission after the unrest, what happened when thousands and thousands of young people came together and changed the world. And recently just ran with my running mate over here in a very close race in the 5th Ward.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Betts. I was born and raised on a farm in Kansas. In 2005, I moved to St. Louis and moved in with, at that time, my boyfriend, now husband, with 3 kids. We moved into his childhood home in the Mark Twain neighborhood. After that, in 2013, we bought our first home in the 5th Ward in the St. Louis Place neighborhood. In 2012, I lost my job, and no, was it not 2012? 2014, I lost my job. I was laid off. And then with when Michael Brown was killed by Darren Wilson, I started going around the neighborhood and talking to everybody. And that's what encouraged me to run, to get into politics. I mean, it was really the residents. People wanted their voices uplifted, and then, you know, we had the election a couple days ago, and now we're here.
Good afternoon. My name is John Collins Muhammad. Like my 2 amazing friends here, I was also a candidate this past election cycle. I ran for state representative in the 77th district. Unfortunately, I was not successful. But just because I lost a race does not mean I am losing energy to serve my community. So now I am here with you beautiful people. And also, like my 2 amazing friends, I was also very active in Ferguson, some good and some bad. But again, Ferguson has taught us all something that we didn't know about ourselves and something that we really didn't understand about the community. So I'm just happy to be here.
I am Terry Kennedy, Alderman, City of St. Louis, 18th Ward. Originally from St. Louis. I was a student organizer in high school as a chairperson of our Black Student Union. That's different than the student government. The Black Student Union was the more activist Black Power and African Consciousness organization. I was chairman of that in both high school and in college. A part of the Free Angela Davis Support Committee and the African Liberation Day Support Committee. I was also one of the organizers of the Black United Front here in St. Louis, as well as a part of what was then called the Congress of African People. I come from a line of activist family, if you would. We didn't call it that in those days. We was in the struggle. My father was a union organizer in the early days of unions. He was born in 1910. My sister was involved in the civil rights sit-ins with Norman Say here in the city of St. Louis, as well as my mother. So activism was a natural part of who we are as both a family and as individuals. However, my twin brother and myself, and we do not look alike, he'd be places when I couldn't go, were on the more radical end. In 1967, my father had become alderman of our area. He was also a survivor of the East St. Louis race riot. We have other people here whose families were survivors of the race riot. And then found himself in elected office. I was on the more radical end of things, and so never saw myself in elected office. But when he passed in 1988, I was asked by a group of elders, you know, elders in our community, when they've seen you grow up, they call you into their house and you sit in their kitchen, and they speak to you across the table and say, you know, like, boy, you need to do this. And so that's what they did to me, which made me really consider it seriously. And so then I ran back in 1989 for alderman of the 18th Ward. There were 9 people in the race. We were the last ones to get in. They said that we had no chance of winning, and we won. I was not endorsed by the ward organization or anybody of any political stature. I was an outsider at that time. But we won and have been in that office. I say we because it was a collective effort. No one person does anything by themselves. We're not even born by ourselves. And so then our collective effort has had me there since that time. We've sponsored and gotten a number of different types of significant legislation, including the resolution on reparations, diversity study, one on women in business, women and minority business participation, and a number. Recently, the Civilian Oversight Board legislation, I was a sponsor, and a number of other things of significance and provide some change in the city of St. Louis. And I would also like to respond to that first question.
Yes.
If you can remind me the question again.
So after all the introductions, the first question I posed was, what made you feel the desire to become politically active?
Oh. First of all, let me say this. And to a large extent, I do not define politics as being in or just simply being in elected office. Politics is the art, the science, and the process of gaining, maintaining, and using power. Power is your capacity to get something done, your ability to achieve your goals in the world. So politics is not necessarily being in elected office. You may get into elected office to manifest your will in the world, but that is not the only place. There's community organizations, there's various institutions, there's businesses. All of these are points and places of power and places where you can get involved to help enact and cause change. What got us involved was racism, exploitation, and disenfranchisement. And the fact that we knew as a group of youth, and we're like 14, 15, 16, that if we did not get involved, nothing would happen. And so then we got involved, and we organized youth organizations. I mean, the movement of the 60s and 70s, to a great extent, was a youth movement. It was not, elders doing it. It was a youth movement. The Panthers, here locally, the Black Liberators, the Black Patriot Party. St. Louis had about 15 or 16 what we consider to be black conscious organizations who were all youth-based, trying to make change in the city of St. Louis. Later on, with the anti-apartheid movement, which many of us were a part of. So politics then, from that viewpoint, and being involved in politics was a natural step towards trying to ensure justice for our community, not necessarily having to get into public office to make that act. That is just one area of political action. The others I mentioned are also as significant, and when they work together, that is when real change happens. I would like to share an experience I had and then let the rest of you, if you want to respond. As youth, we had the opportunity. St. Louis had a bus boycott, if any of you remember that, when Bi-State would not hire black drivers. And so our community said, that's not going to happen. If those buses are coming down our streets and we're driving in or riding in them, we have a right to drive those buses. So there was a large community rally and meeting held at the Regal Theater, which was like the old Comet Theater. It held about 2,000 people. The thing was packed. All these folks from the black community in the city of St. Louis. You had clergy, politically elected officials, you had black business people, you had mothers, fathers, all there. The first thing they did is to say, we're not going to sit here and talk about each other. We're going to deal with this issue. They organized a bus boycott. The black cab drivers said that we're going to take people around for free. Mothers in their homes and fathers, we're going to cook the food so people can drive the cars. It's going to take the people around for free. It was organized. That kind of thing can happen, and that was a political action. We didn't necessarily get a law to do that. That was one of those community organized events where change was made and can happen. That is an example of the various areas of political power and ways that you can make change.
I came out the wound active. I wouldn't say politically. Having a prosthetic on my leg on my right side is shorter than my left side, so when I take it off, I hop around the house. So I'm just active in all type of ways. But growing up, looking at the work of my mom, we all kind of want to be like our parents. We all look up to our parents, and my mom was very involved in the community. She used to help the Alderwoman who was down there with the back-to-school drives, Thanksgiving events, just very involved with the seniors when they had different events going on. So seeing her and the stuff that she did kind of made me want to be like my mom / my dad, being a single parent. But I think what really got me wanting to do something for my community was, like I said, I was a Parkway West student, so I lived in the city, but I went to the county. So I would live in a neighborhood, which was my neighborhood, and feel like I didn't have many opportunities. Feel like I didn't have the same playgrounds like they were in West County. I mean, just walking down the streets in West County, I mean, the air and everything just looked so much nicer, right? And when I would go back home, I wouldn't have those opportunities, or I wouldn't be able to go to a library because there wasn't one in my neighborhood, or community center. So we had to do what it do and play with the rocks and made the little chips that we had in the neighborhood, and freeze tag and all those things happen. But I just didn't understand why in my own neighborhood, sometimes I almost felt even in cage, right? I felt like an animal. I felt like things wasn't right, but when I would go 30 miles out my own community, it would feel like everything was perfect, right? All the opportunities, the grass was green, the birds was chirping, everything was just perfect. So at a young age, I wanted to not necessarily get politically involved, but I wanted to get involved. And I got involved in several different campaigns. But like others had said up here, I think Ferguson was really the wake for me to say enough is enough, that we don't have true representation, not only in Ferguson, but as we know, Ferguson is everywhere. Ferguson really isn't the worst bad actors. There's many worse than them. And St. Louis City, our backyard's not that clean either. So even though we was out there protesting in Ferguson, I still understood that I had to do something in my own backyard. Like I said, I didn't know it was going to be done politically, but I just felt like there was no one there for the young people. There was no one there. Well, let me not say there was no one, because Alderman Kennedy was always there. But there wasn't representation like him in all the wards that we have. It wasn't representation like him for committee or for alderman or state rep. A lot of them just blowed it off and felt like, you know, nothing could be done. I understand this issue of, you know, people of color being killed at the hands of police, communities being disinvested, education systems not being the same have been going on for years. But the ones that was in power during a time like this that shook the world, you would expect done more. The ones that look like me, that understand what it is to live in zip code 62106, and the median income is $15,000, would stand up to the plate, you know, when a minimum wage bill came across the board of the BOE, Board of Elections, Board of Aldermen. We don't have leaders fearless like Mr. Kennedy that really understand being there, being at the forefront, being there when the community needs you to be there. And that's why I got politically active and ran for office.
So, as I kind of in my introduction, after Ferguson, while Ferguson was, everything was going on, 3 blocks from my house, my neighborhood had just been notified that their homes were going to be taken away. Well, they could sell their homes, or in the eminent domain could take their homes away. So I met in a house with a bunch of the neighbors who had this happen. They had been threatened by this before. There was going to be a golf course, maybe a horse track. I think that's what some people said, but this was they were concerned, but a lot of them didn't think this was going to happen because, like I said, this is the same story that's happened in the area. So I sat down with a bunch of the neighbors, and we formed a group called Save Northside STL. And what we did was try to help save their homes. This was for the NGA coming into the neighborhood. We obviously we did not save their homes, but we were able to, and we're still fighting to make sure people get good packages and are relocated to places that they want to be. There are still people that don't have anywhere to go. There's some people living in hotels, so it's still a fight. But what I learned from that was that when the residents reached out for help from their elected officials, nobody responded. Pictures were shown of a blighted area, of no homes, of no people living there. Even an elected official said that it takes neighbors to be a neighborhood. And that's not what I saw, and that's not what I knew, because I was there. It was 3 blocks away. Also, while that was happening, and this might, some people might not, there was, where I live in the 5th Ward, there's not much access to grocery stores and, basic shopping at all. And we had found out that there was a Family Dollar that wanted to come in. I know some people are against Family Dollars, but the community, the residents wanted it. In less than a week, we were able to get 300 plus signatures from residents that wanted it, but it was stopped on a higher level. As Mr. Kennedy stated, it doesn't necessarily have to be a political to make change, and we got it, and it's happening, and it's coming to our neighborhood, and our residents are very happy. So, like you said, I didn't have to be in a political seat to make that happen. It just took knocking on doors, getting signatures, and showing that this is what the community wanted. So that's how we got into this. From that, people started saying, hey, there's these positions. We started talking about committee seats, and it's the residents. And now we're here.
Before I ask my next question, I'd like to introduce the 2 panelists that just joined us. Bruce Franks, who ran for state representative in the 78th District, and also Ms. Cori Bush, who ran for United States Senate. I'd like to ask this new question for you all. A lot of activists believe the current system of voting isn't beneficial to them. In fact, many believe that people have become too dependent on voting to enact change. How do you answer people who have lost faith in the voting system?
Well, I think in the black community and in disenfranchised communities, we haven't been dependent enough on the vote and the politics, and that comes from being disenfranchised with the whole political process. We see day in, day out, election after election, the same thing happening. Just like Tuesday. Anytime you have candidates who spark a ward in a district to come out to vote for something new, something different, and you have a political family that takes advantage of a process, an absentee process, which they've taken advantage of for years on top of years, and other elected officials even know this and kept silent and kept quiet, to the point where when we ran, the first thing they told us was, watch out for their absentees. Why didn't anybody do anything about the absentees beforehand? We talk about how we need to elect more officials that represent the community, but the officials that we are electing that represent the community and look like the community aren't truly representing the community. That's the reason why we ran in the first place, because it was time for something different. And if you go into an election where you are 300 votes behind because of an absentee scandal, and you still come out and only lose by 84 votes, that says something about the people. That says something about the real machine, the people that cast those votes, not the people who take the politics as a family business. And that's exactly what we need to stop. So outside of educating our disenfranchised community, our activists, and everybody about the process, it comes for our local officials, our older generation who knows this is going on. It's time for them to speak up as well. Because we talk about silence. We talk about this code of silence that the police have and this code of silence that we have in the hood, but we're not talking about this black code of silence in politics. So yeah, that's how I feel.
Two other panelists like to comment?
Hello, everyone. I'm Cori Bush. With that question, that's one thing that several activists came to me and said that, Cori, we support you, but, we support y'all, but we don't vote. We don't believe in the system. You know how we feel. And I can understand that, because at one point, I remember in an election not too long ago, I didn't vote. I said I wasn't voting, and I've been voting since I was 18, but I said, you know what, I'm looking at it, and the people on this ballot, none of them I feel represent me or speak for me, so I'm not voting. But the thing is this, so especially like with this election, when you don't vote, you vote. And at the end of the day, when you don't vote, you vote. And I think that especially in the activist community, because we fought so hard in Ferguson. And I mean, we fought hard, blood, sweat, and tears. You know, saw so many people get hurt. I got hurt. So many of us up here were hurt, not just in our hearts and in our minds, but physically we were hurt. You know, and so for all that we went through and all that we dealt with, for us to not take it a step further, that's why we ran. You know, for me, I said I was running because I felt like what we did in Ferguson for those more than 400 days that we actually did protest, for all of that we did out there, if we don't allow that to push us into a place of power, because what we saw was for all the chanting and all the running, all the everything that we did, but there was nobody in power that was willing to stand up for us and to push those things through that we wanted to see done. And so all we did was we set people on base. We had somebody on first, second, and third, but if nobody else is up to bat to bring those people home, then what did we just do? So for me, it was like, get up to the bat, you know. And so that's what we did. The issue, so talking to the activist community, I said, well, this is our activism. Our activism was strong, but our biggest protest is when you go and you run for office. Your biggest protest is when you go vote, because then you use your voice. And this is the thing, this is the other problem with that, is we vote blindly, especially in the black community. We vote so blindly. We allow people to tell us who to vote for. We take that sample ballot and we just check it off because these are our community leaders. Forget that. I'm done with that. I don't need somebody telling me who to vote for. The problem is, and this is what I saw in my own race, is that we look to community leaders to tell us what to do, but you got to check those community leaders that are telling you what to do, because so many are bought and bossed. So what I'm saying now is I will be starting my own thing, however it has to go, where we're educating our community. You need to know who that person is, because one thing that I saw was everybody in the black community wanted to vet me, but they didn't vet the white person running. You got to vet every single person. Don't just vet the black person because we obviously can't be the choice. You know, your credentials don't come just because you're white. We all have to be on a level playing field. So with the same thing with the activist community, we have to stand up and what we did was we changed the world. Ferguson, we changed the world, the entire world, and it's still, the effects of that are still happening today. So because of that, we can use that same power to affect these elections, especially black women. We know the block that black women hold in our community in voting, and so we're going to push that through. So I've been saying to all the activists, and now a lot of them did come through and decide to vote.
If I may, the question of whether or not we should be involved in voting, and whether or not this is a corrupt system, is a question that we as a people and community have been wrestling with since slavery. There have been many groups and organizations that have said the system is so corrupt, it is unworkable. Do not get involved in even voting. Some of us participated in those organizations in the 70s and 80s. The All African People's Revolutionary Party, at one time even the Nation of Islam took a position that the system is so corrupt, we should not be involved in voting at all. It is not a new question. It didn't grow with what has recently happened in the past 2 years. It is a fundamental question since the ending of slavery, how much we should participate in this. Some of us have taken the position of completely separating ourselves from America. And then there was a movement to create 4 independent black states in the southern part of the United States. That was the Republic of New Africa. Many of them ended up in prison because you know what the U.S. government did with those individuals. It wasn't top of the news because you didn't have MSNBC at that time, so you didn't hear about it in that kind of way. It doesn't mean that the movement was not there. This is not a new question. My point earlier was that politics is larger than simply being in elected office. Politics is the art and process and the science of the use of power, your ability to manifest your will in the world. When you clearly identify what your goals are, you can then identify what angle or what avenue to go after that. Do we put a person in the congressional seat, or do we look at the committee seats, or do we look at the aldermanic or the mayoral seats? But what would guide that is a collective goal and a collective clarity on objectives and mission. So to a large extent, when we lost, St. Louis used to have what was called a United Black Front, the Black United Front, where various groups and organizations came together and tried to create a political black agenda. At that particular time, it was called. So it's not a new question. Now, some of us had to recognize, and we did, that voting is an act of power, and that these positions do control resources, and they do create policies that affect our lives. So we could not take the position of saying we didn't need to be involved in it when this thing is still affecting us. And so as activists really measure and weigh this thing out, we have to look at what area is affecting us, what we wish to accomplish in that, and then identify where we're going to push what buttons to get done what we want. That is a key point in this. So my point here is that it's not a new issue, it's not a new point. Those of us that have been involved in what we call the struggle for some time recognize that this is a question that we've been wrestling with as a community for some time. I believe it is important that we do involve ourselves in voting, but that is only one avenue of the political actions that we need to be taking. An important one, no doubt, but it's only one of a series of actions and fronts we need to be working on.
Well, we have about 5 more minutes before the open Q&A, but I'd like to hear on this question because it's kind of relevant, because especially in light of the DNC that happened a couple of days ago. There is a lot of discontent in the movement with the Democratic Party, the movement for Black Lives. Many felt that the people of color have consistently given the Democratic Party their vote without the loyalty being reciprocated. Do you believe that people of color should continue being loyal to the Democrats, and why?
Honestly, I think there's just voter ignorance. It is true that most blacks, especially here in Missouri, are Democratic. And I can't even tell you why. It's just a historical fact. I don't know why. I am a Democrat, but I'm not loyal to the Democratic Party because it has been evident and it's proven that the Democratic Party has not had the best interests of African Americans, especially here in Missouri. In fact, I think the Democratic Party is one of the most racist organizations in the state of Missouri. All of us who ran just this past election cycle has had major problems with the Democratic Party, not wanting to release information, not wanting to release voter demographics or voter records, not wanting to fully get behind and support Democratic candidates, which we all were, for offices. The Democratic Party is biased. The Democratic Party has its chosen pick. And I can imagine if it's like that on the state level, if it's like that on the city level, it's like that on the federal level as well. Cori Bush, who ran for she ran for U.S. Senator. That's real big. The Democratic Party did not give her any help. They didn't give her any resources, any funds to do anything, but they did to the other candidate who was running. And I don't know why. Maybe because he's already a sitting political official, Secretary of State. But that shouldn't matter if they're both running for one office, if they're both are running for the same office to represent Missouri and they both are Democratic. Blacks have voted Democratic, and nothing has happened out of that process. We're still in the exact same struggle. We're in the exact same oppression. We're in the exact same condition, if not worser. I'm not saying that blacks should go and vote for Republicans or should go and vote for Donald Trump, but I am saying that we have to be a little bit more educated on who we give our vote to and what we give our vote to. In my own opinion, I think the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, is just the exact same. You know, we have to choose the lesser of two evils.
I think that if we
3 minutes, 3 minutes. That's what you know.
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Okay, I'll keep it short. I think that if we're going to continue to be Democrats or support the Democratic Party, I think that if Black lives truly matters to the Democratic Party as a whole, then we need to be at the table setting platforms and structure for the Democratic Party. All too often, we've been conditioned to vote Democrat because when I was growing up, they said poor people are Democrats. Republicans got money. And that's just what was taught to us. That's what we were conditioned to believe. So we run as Democrats. I would just rather run as a person. I would rather just run as the views that I see, the resources I intend to allocate, the people I intend to stand up for. That's what I would rather run as. But while we have this flawed system, it's once again segregated into political parties. So if we're going to be at the table as Democrats, then Democrats need to have more input from the black community if they truly believe in Black Lives Matter, because it's easy to hashtag and say it because it sounds cool, but what are we doing in this process to preserve black lives on a political level?
One minute.
There was a movement nationally in the late 70s to create an independent black party. The idea of that party was that as a community of individuals, we would set our own agendas and look at what other parties we could unite with to meet our goals and objectives. Initially, African Americans were involved in the Republican Party because they said that was the party of Lincoln. In the 40s, when we were involved in the Republican Party, this is what they did. We could have, we had black areas, black wards, but the committee people had to be white. The Republican Party would not allow black people to be committee folks. In the city of St. Louis, Jordan Chambers, there's a park named for him at Compton and Franklin. Jordan Chambers led the African American community, and Fred Weathers, there's a post office named for him over on North Kings Highway. Jordan Chambers, Fred Weathers, and several others led the black community to the Democratic Party from the Republican Party. They made a deal with the Democratic Party. That deal was that the Democratic Party would support black candidates and allow black committee men and women, because the Republican Party did not. That's how we ended up going to the Democratic Party, because there was an agreement to allow for black elected officials to be endorsed by the Democratic Party. We didn't hop over there because we liked the Democrats better than the Republicans. It met our interest, and that is my point. We have to be clear about what is in our best interest and align ourselves with who meets our needs, because everybody else does.
Thank you. Now we open up the floor to any questions in the audience. Just come in the middle and then ask your question as concise as possible, and then two of the panelists will answer your question.
Hi. I'm familiar with Bill Clay and his son, Lacey Clay, and the Post-Dispatch referred to, can you hear better? Can you raise it up? I'm sure you're familiar with Lacey Clay and his dad, Bill Clay, and Bill Clay was a representative in I believe the second district and the first district for a long, long time. And the Post-Dispatch referred to that as a business, like he has the right to hand this seat down to his son, which seems a little unfair to somebody else who possibly wanted to run and represent that district. And I know personally that district has a lot of, they gerrymandered that to include a lot of white areas to make sure that they didn't count. Now there's a white man running against Lacey Clay. But what I noticed is listening to this whole Planned Parenthood deal, that Lacey Clay supported Planned Parenthood. And what I know about Planned Parenthood, it has a very racist past. And Alveda King, who is related to Martin Luther King, she's very opposed to Planned Parenthood. And I know I went to a meeting of 40 Days for Life, and they go on the sidewalk by Planned Parenthood and on Forest Park Parkway. And three of the mothers, the babies they say, were all black. But none of the people in that group, their banquet that I went to for 40 Days for Life were black. I didn't see any black people. So what you have is people supporting this organization. And I know Planned Parenthood is known for targeting blacks, and there's a very high proportion of blacks. So I guess my question is, at what point blacks say, okay, Lacey Clay doesn't necessarily support us, and how do you, because I know if he's the incumbent, he's going to get the majority of votes in the city. So at one point you say, no, he's not our candidate, and how does somebody else run instead of him in the Democratic Party? Because that seems pretty much impossible. That's my question.
I don't think I'm clear on the question.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, I think all of us are a little bit confused
On your question.
on the question.
Yeah, what is the question?
Yeah, please state the question in like one good sentence for us.
How do you go about taking on an incumbent like that when they have such seniority and he's just accepted, even though maybe he doesn't represent a lot of the black churches who are opposed to abortion? How do you do that when he's supposed to like back the Democratic Party, which supports Planned Parenthood?
I got you.
Okay.
So you do what we did. First off, it has to be the right candidate. You can't just put anybody up to run against an incumbent, especially a well-entrenched incumbent. The community has to create that candidate. That candidate has to come from the community. That candidate has to be able to reach the community. And then you need to get somebody who has integrity, somebody who won't be pushed, weighed, bought, scared, or anything else. And that's exactly what we did. And I keep referring to we because we ran as a team. We ran against a team against the state and aldermanic and committee version of the Clays. And we won, no matter what the numbers say. We absolutely won. So that's how you take down an incumbent. You get in there and you get a person from the community that the community builds. You have a grassroots campaign. You knock doors. You keep knocking doors. You meet the people exactly where they're at, and you engage the community. And then when you run into things like we ran into, you have to be willing to fight, and you have to be willing to continue to fight until we see it out, and not just get tired of this process or get tired and say, oh, well, this is just the same old Hubbard, the same old Clay. We're going to let this happen, because that's not what we're doing. In January, you will see a new state representative in the 78th district.
But if we're not careful, we won't have a first congressional district. That district was created by and fought for by DeVern Calloway, who was this state's first black female state representative. She carved that out when she became chair of that redistricting committee. And her job at that time, and she saw it as that, and she had the will of the people, was to create Missouri's first district that an African American could be elected in. And that's how Congressman Clay, then who was an alderman, became the first black congressman from the state of Missouri. It was work to get it there. Now, since then, there's been a move to try to, as he said, expand it out and include other communities so it's no longer predominantly African American. We will have to make sure that that does not happen, or this will not be even a conversation 10 years from now.
Next question.
Yes. Bruce Franklin, Mr. John Muhammad, and Alderman Terry Kennedy. I want to talk about term limits. I worked for the late State Senator Jet Banks as an intern. And I was just wondering, now, they don't have term limits in the Board of Aldermen or for citywide elected official. They do have term limits in the legislature in Jeff City. Right. I wanted to know, does that help or hurt African American term limits, and are you in favor of it?
Can we answer this question really quick so the next lady can have a question before pose her question before 2 o'clock?
Answer it real quick, basically.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that term term limits are, if we have an alderman like Terry Kennedy, I'm okay with him being alderman forever. But if we have an alderman like Tamika Hubbard, then we need term limits. So it's trying to find that middle ground. It's a real hard question to ask, because when you have great elected officials, you want to keep those elected officials as long as possible. But when you don't have good ones, the great thing about democracy is we got this thing called voting, where we can get out there and we can vote for new people and put new people in those positions.
I would like to respond to that too. I believe that there should be some kind of term limit. I believe that, so that you can get some of the change. You know, I would give you an example. First of all, the American democratic system is not the only example of democracy. There's other ways to approach having an individual vote and have the people control things. There's other ways, and some of those have solved problems that America has yet to get to. But I certainly think that there needs to be term limits long enough that allow for work and accomplishment of tasks. Presently, I believe what is at the state is too short, because what ends up happening is that bureaucrats end up having the historical knowledge, they have their finger on the power, and you can never be in long enough to affect the kind of change that you want, because you're out in 2 terms. So if it's a reasonable term, I definitely think so there can be change. I just want to give a quick example. The Giguyu people of East Africa, I have what I call a controlled revolution. Every so many years, it's about 40 years, one generation must completely give control of government over to the next generation. Controlled revolution. They have a democratic system. So we have to be clear. What we see in America is not the only approach to democracy. Right. And there are other peoples who are much older than America who have solved problems that America has yet to get to. And we carry that historical legacy with us as well.
The thing is, we got to know that. We need the elders,
Absolutely.
We need the people with the knowledge of that to come teach us, because we don't know the first thing about going to find out about all of these different processes.
Right.
So when we have knowledgeable individuals like yourself and others, then we need to pass that information.
Absolutely.
And,
and some of the ones sitting here at this table has tried to take advantage of that, because it's not just the elders coming to you. You got to search them out like we did.
Absolutely.
In our generation as well.
Thank you for your question. Real quick.
Yeah, Mr. John.
Actually, I agree with both of them. It's a pretty side and an ugly side to term limits, especially when you have a representative or a political official who is not doing anything to improve the quality of life for his or her constituents. I like his idea. One generation needs to give up complete power to the next. The problem is there's a power struggle here in Missouri. The older generation do not want to see young people run for office. All of us are young. Alderman Kennedy, he's pretty young. But he has had, he really is. He has had backlash in the Board of Aldermen. He has had backlash by other city officials, and we all have encountered that same backlash as well. So there's a power struggle in St. Louis where they are trying to suppress young African-American leadership, because if it's one thing about this generation, the younger generation is not afraid to stand up for black people, not afraid to say that Black Lives Matter. And that's a problem for a lot of people, especially when you have a older gentleman who is apologetic to white racism, or who is apologetic to black oppression, because that's exactly what we're experiencing here in St. Louis. So that has to be, it has to literally be an enlightenment. It all goes back to enlightenment. Older blacks, it's time for them to give it up and give it to young blacks. That's the problem.
Thank you for your question.
Hello. I actually hate to close with this question because I feel like it's a loaded question. I'm Jamie Motley. First of all, I work in student educational services here at SLU. I have a lot of very candid one-on-one conversations with students in my office. I'm an advisor to 80-plus students, and our conversations get pretty deep. You know, we talk about everything from their personal journeys, family struggles, politics, everything. And we are in a very interesting presidential race at this point, and sometimes students want to express to me their lack of faith in the process. And I've heard some really important themes that you all have shared about, by not voting, you're voting, and not being loyal to a specific party, but taking the time to learn about different candidates. What can I tell a student who honestly has no faith in any of the presidential candidates based on the information that has been shared when I feel similarly?
Right.
When I, too, don't feel that I have had as much substance provided to me throughout this process. You all have been through the process. I know it's local elections, but this is big. What would you tell people who honestly do not have any faith moving forward, but we're faced with a major election, and we feel a responsibility to play a role and to vote? We just don't want to be forced. I think you might have said, Mr. Collins, Muhammad, the lesser of two evils. I've found myself saying that over and over again. What do we do? What advice would I share? Because I struggle with this myself.
We have 5 minutes to answer this question, so make it please as concise as possible.
Okay. So what I've been saying to people is, and I'm still trying to chew on it myself, is number one, I have to vote my legacy. I have to vote for whatever my legacy is. So what do I want to see, and what do I want to see my children and my children's children end up walking through? Because right now we're walking through what our parents did and our grandparents did, and it hurts. So what do I want to see? Because either way, somebody's going to get in. So what do you want to see? What do you want for the next generation is one. And the other thing is just knowing that when you vote for somebody, you're putting your stamp on that person. And so if I'm putting my stamp on that person, I need to research it. That's our problem. So let's not just take what the media is saying about the two that are running. Look a little further. What's going on in the Green Party, or what's going on here? We have to research it further and not just take what the media is saying. So if you could talk to them about researching every piece for themselves, and then after that making the educated decision, that would be the best way.
Similar to what Cori said, it's sad to say we always constantly over and over say which one, right? They one's not as really as progressive as the parties say, and we're not even going to talk about the other one. But who is going to be most beneficial to our community? And then we don't stop there. That's the problem. Like Cori said, we stop there. We pick the party, we pick the individual, we put them in office. We got to continue to stay organized. We got to continue to push the person to know what our values is and to accept our values. Because if they didn't grow up in our neighborhood, if they didn't grow up in a community where the resources aren't as high, if they didn't grow up in a community where sirens are always going off, they don't know what's going on. They don't know what a young boy has to see on a constant basis. So we have to push them. And we have to push them to know where we stand. So who do we really want representing our community, and how can we push them is how I feel about it. It is the two are less of evils, but we just can't stay settled. We have to push like we pushed in Ferguson. We have to change that notion. We have to raise awareness, and we have to demand what we want after the candidates.
And I want to echo what Cori said. I myself, I'm still, doing more research, but as we saw with President Obama, is that he might have certain things that he wants to get done, but it's who is below him and below him and below him, just like us. So the presidential election, it's important, but what I would also be saying is, who else are you researching? Research for Congress, research all those. Those are just as important. They hold just as much power. As we saw with Obama, things could not get done because of what is happening with Congress, with Senate. So the presidential election is important, but the other ones are, this election was huge, what we just went through. So
that's
I want to
last comment.
I'll be real quick. I agree with Megan. The president is definitely important, the most premier position a person can have, a politician can have. But we also have to understand the critical importance of the people under him and the people who are actually going to be voting on laws. We have two candidates here just recently who we sent to Congress from the state of Missouri. We have Jason Kander. Most likely he's probably going to win, unfortunately. And we have Lacey Clay, who's going to win, unfortunately. We have to look at their records. What have they really done for our community? What have they really done to help improve the conditions, the physical conditions, the mental conditions, the social conditions of black people, of black communities? And when you look at their track record, you can see that they really have none. So we just cannot solely rely on the president. We have to understand those who are truly going to be the ones to make these laws possible. And again, I think Donald Trump is the devil. I think Hillary Clinton is Lucifer. I think they both the same. But that does not mean they cannot be held accountable for what goes on in our community. You know, we just have to be, like Megan said, we have to be a little bit more hands-on, a little bit more productive when it comes to being engaged in the presidential election process. But we cannot forget about the local elections, because that's what matters. We're never going to see Donald Trump walk into our homes. Hillary Clinton is not going to knock on our doors. All of us up here have knocked. He will. I agree. I agree, and that's exactly what I was about to say. All of us have knocked on people's doors. All of us have made phone calls. All of us, you'll see us all walking the street because we truly care about what goes on, and because we're local, we're here. You won't see Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, so we cannot continue to put so much pressure or so much dependence on them. But I understand that, though.
And, I think it's uninspiring to say to them, vote for the lesser evil. That's uninspiring. And so what I would say to them, I would suggest you're saying, is that we need to vote for those that represent our interests as best as it can. There's a saying in politics that someone may not be able to help you, but the question is, can they hurt you? Will they be in a position to harm us? And so then, if having that particular person in position harms us more than the other, it is intelligent for us to support the one that would harm us the least. Now, you can call that voting for the lesser the evil, but that is uninspiring. It is a political act to cause a people to be uninspired. And uninspired people will work less for their enfranchisement than those who are inspired. So I would also raise that to them. Our movement as a people didn't end because we suddenly just said we achieved all our goals. Our movement was attacked. If you've ever heard of the COINTELPRO, the whole justice movement was attacked. I've seen it happen, have been on the brunt end of that, of police stopping us, breaking into our various headquarters, holding us at gunpoint, stopping us from coming out of our Black Student Union meetings at the time we had them at the Sheldon Memorial for no reason. You know, I've seen that happen. I've had it happen to me. The idea there is to keep the people from being inspired, and uninspired people will not work for change. So then, saying to them the lesser of the two evils uninspires them, I would say more so that we have a right to help determine which one will be in office, and we want the one that best meets our interest and our perspective.
And we have to end the discussion there, but the discussion beyond that continues beyond this forum itself. Can you please give a round of applause to the candidates and the panelists? Can you ask them face to face? We have 15 minutes to the next panel. Can you do it face to face?
This thing gonna take them but a second.
Oh, we have to end right now. We have another session in 15 minutes.
It's just a quickie. Just a quickie. All I want to know is, it may not be my business or anything, but did any of you all have monetary issues when you all were running?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
We all did. We did.
Didn't win.
Hey, quick, huh?
Yeah. Okay. Our next session this ends the political session, and our next session will begin in 15 minutes with civics. I feel like I'm getting slightly better, but like I'm stuck a lot. But like I'm slightly getting better every time. Keep motioning to the I need to like meet you ahead of time.
Same bank, different section.
Yes, I remember. Oh, right.
Thank you, Chief. Well, let's just say, stay tuned to the film. It ain't done. It ain't done yet. Well, of course. Very good.
Like somebody. I'm going to start off something real simple. I'll tell you this one time, I ran for, which one for it? 1978. Which one for it? Because they can't understand. It's the whole afterward that I was still at. But it's because we have a person standing on top of the mountain. So that cannot see as far as an elder sitting in the valley. You know what I'm saying? In other words, been there, done it. You know, and they can see much further than you standing in that mountain. And that's the reality of the situation. I didn't know. Okay, yeah, check that out. No, when people are saying it, they don't. They're talking about it. They say the movie is still on the show. That's what I hear. Because this is also, it's talking about black people. I'm talking about, yeah, I understand the great. But still, so anyway, I don't where will be best? Is this, I guess, so it'll be in
boss.
How you doing? The boss. Doing all right. Thank you so much. You enjoying yourself?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is really well. I'm so proud of you.
At this point. Oh yeah. You see my twin from 20 years ago?
Well, look, I don't even pay a lot of attention. So you told me, I looked for him. I didn't take me home to look. I said, you look like your dad.
All right, Chief, you gonna sit over here or?
Wherever you put my name, I don't know where to put it.
I'm sitting here.
I'm all the way down the end.
It's easy. Okay. Hey, Regina.
All right.
Okay, that's fine. We'll be all right.
I knew your father. Yeah, your father was awesome.
Where are you going to high school and college?
I want to graduate.
I know it. Yeah. Did you know Mr. Pulley? Yeah. He's a DJ as well.
I think he's like
He's a DJ. He was on the radio.
How you doing? Rest up here?
All right. Hey, Tay. Thank you. Where the mic at? So how you doing, Regina?
Regina?
I'm doing all right. What's going on? How's everything coming? Busy, but you can handle it though, right? It's different than alumni relations, right? More exciting. Kentucky. Show me what's going on. That's it. Oh.
Yes, sir. Oh, yeah.
Hold on a second. Can I start right?
What was the Donnie Hathaway? I think it was the last one. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, it'll be something. Yeah. Donnie Hathaway.
No,
Yeah.
exactly. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, yeah. He was paid a part in that. Yeah. Well, yeah, he was on the side talking about different things. Yeah. Well, you know what? Maybe it wasn't the last one. Ron was, yeah. I saw that one too, yeah.
How'd it go? You good?
Yeah.
All right. Is it going to be front? Like, is it going to be like public?
Oh, I know. Captain Daniel. Yeah, I know.
Power Bro.
Your brother, huh? Oh, okay. Know him well. Oh. Well, if you show him how you steal his buddy, you all right. The house must have been all right.
What bookstore? The Progressive Emporium. Are you